see you here this morning. This opportunity for us to just continue this series of ours on prayer. Kind of what does prayer mean and how do we do it? This whole process of what it means to be in communication with this God of ours. And so I wanted you to have the text of the reading in front of us because we're going to do some things with it. This is going to be a little bit of an interactive sermon for us together. But I want to look first at these first three verses to be able to kind of gauge the mind as we move in here about what's the psalmist, the one who's writing these words, what's the psalmist feeling? So these are the first three verses. It says, "Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my meditation. Hearken to my cry for help, my God and my King, for I make my prayer to you. In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. Early in the morning, I make my appeal and watch for you." So I want to get a little bit into the head of the psalmist, the guy who's writing these words. And let me just kind of ask this question. So as you hear those words, as you look at them on your little slip of paper, what's the mindset, the approach that this psalmist is having? Is he just kind of, oh, chill, I'm sitting here with my cocktail under the tree and just kind of cruising down the road kind of thing? Or what's going on with him? What's animating him? Can you tell? What's that? He's crying for help. And so if he's crying for help, then does that suggest that something's going on with him, right? So there's a little bit of energy here. He is motivated to want to kind of do something, to have something change, something that's going on. So he gets up early in the morning, it says, early in the morning my cry comes to you. And so is that because just simply he has a discipline of getting up in the morning to pray? Maybe. But maybe he's up early in the morning because he can't sleep. Anybody ever do that? Yeah. So maybe he's up early in the morning because there's something that's disturbing him. And he describes his prayer as a cry. So it's a cry. He's appealing from some pretty deep places to this thing, whatever it is that's going on in his life. So he's coming to God, and he's really he's putting it out there. He wants something. And so we'll see in just a little bit that there are people who are making his life miserable. And probably the psalmist is the only person who's ever had that problem. Right? Is that true? There are people who are making his life miserable. And so he's calling out to God for help in the middle of this situation. And there's this sense of fear about it, right? So, I just read an article not long ago about fear in our culture and our time. And this sense that fear just preoccupies us as a culture. So whether it's marketing and that the people who are selling products want to make us afraid so that we buy their products, or whether it's the news or the media so that they get our attention, so they rivet us to them, this sense of fear that's going on. So let me ask you the question. So what do people in general around us, what do they do? People you yourself, but people that you know in general, what do they do in order to be able to cope with fear in their life? What do? They grin and bear it? Okay, kind of put up with it. What else do people do? What's that? Ignore it? Okay, what else do? They drown it out. What else do? They self-medicate using shopping, drugs, working out, distracting themselves, right? Okay, what else do? Withdrawal. Oh, yeah. There are not a lot of problems that I don't feel a lot better about with a nice big slice of double chocolate cake, right? Somehow that makes the world look a lot better. Yep. Alcohol, all kinds of things that we do in order to be able to cope with the fear that's around us. And let me tell you, fear is all around us. And not all fear is bad fear, right? So there are some fears that are legitimate, good fears. So you go out and get in your car to go driving someplace, and you put on your seatbelt because something could happen to you. And you make your kids put on their seatbelts because something could happen, right? So if fear motivates us to be able to do good things, then God gives us fear in order for us to be able to be wise about what we do. But a lot of fear is not that kind of fear. And so how is it that we deal with this tremendous onslaught of fear in this world that is just crazy? We're still recovering and still trying to figure out about the Parkland shootings, right? And this sense of how do we think about this? What's going on in our culture, in our world? How do we do this? How do we come to terms with all of this stuff in our lives? And so the choice that the psalmist makes is not to simply obsess, not to hide, not to drink himself into a stupor, but to be able to pray. And the focus of his prayer is these enemies of his who are making his life miserable. So what I'd like to do is for us to be able to divide up a little bit. So, and this is so perfect. You guys, you're in 3 different sections, so that's ideal. You anticipated me perfectly. So over here, I would like you guys to work on the people who we might call the wicked. You got that? The wicked. In a play or in a drama, the wicked are always the most interesting people. So what I'd like you to do is to be able to look through the psalm, and I'm going to give an assignment to each of the 3 groups, and I want you to be able to look at the wicked, and I want you to be able to go through the psalm and describe what are the things that the wicked do, or that the kind of the adjectives that describe them from this psalm. And so if you've got a pen or a pencil, you can use that. But I want you to go through and to be able to do that. And I'm going to give each of us 30 seconds to be able to do that. So you work on that. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Don't worry. Over here, I want you all to be God. I mean, you've always wanted to be God. I mean, let's get real. You've always wanted. So what I want you to do is to be able to look at the passage and to pull out everything that describes who this God is that we worship, or the kinds of things that God does. Okay? Got it? All right. And then over here, I want you to be the psalmist or the writer of this passage. So, what are the kinds of things that the psalmist, the writer, feels like he ought to do in regard to this conflicted situation that he finds himself in? You got it? Does that make sense? All right. And I'm going to give everybody 30 seconds of silence in order to be able to do that. You ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Da, 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 da. 4 seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right. So now, so this drama starts. So we've already talked about the psalmist as he's got a place of some anxiety, fear that's going on in his life. He's animated, and so and the focus of his issues have to do with y'all. Y'all are being a pain in his posterior, right? So what kinds of things describe to us the kinds of things that people in your group, the kinds of things that the wicked do, or the kinds of people that they are? What are they? They lie, yes. They scheme. They're hypocritical. They are braggarts. They're bloodthirsty. They flatter. They don't understand. Anything else? They are deceitful. Yes. So these people, do you think they are, what do they look like on the outside? Do you think they're kind of ruffian kinds of people? Do you think they're pretty refined? What do you kind of think? Probably pretty refined. So if this is King David, if it is, who's writing this, probably pretty suave, sophisticated kind of people, pretty smooth kinds of folks. But open the trunk, you see what you get, right? Now, let me say one other thing about Psalms, reading Psalms for us as we use the Psalms in our prayer life. So it's possible for us to be able to identify people who are being like this in our lives. Are there people who are like that out in the world around us? Oh, yeah. There are lots of people who are like that in our lives. But the kinds of things that we're talking about are bigger than just other individual people, right? So there are other things that are out there that also assault us that have these characteristics. So deceitfulness, so scheming, so these things, these spiritual forces of darkness that tempt us from outside and inside. So when we're praying against these things, it can be people who are evil, genuinely evil, who are doing evil things, but it can also be, these evil places, these deadly sins that assault us and tempt us to depart from the path that God has for us. Does that make sense? So then the Psalms can come alive for us, as we're wrestling with all of the things that are going on inside of us. So these are the folks who are causing all of this anxiety that the psalmist is talking about. And now, but he's coming. The psalmist is coming. And so as we talked about, so how do you deal with, all of the things that we're afraid of? Well, you drink too much, you eat too much, you distract yourself, you hide, you do all of those kinds of things. But the psalmist isn't doing that. The psalmist is going to you. So out of this passage, so what kinds of things can we tell about this God who he's appealing to? What's this God like? He what? He doesn't like the wicked. No, he doesn't. He is love. He is love. He is a judge, isn't he? I'm sorry? He listens. He's a listener. Yep. He provides a refuge, doesn't he? Yep. He defends, so he's a shield, right? Yep, provides a shield. What else? He is a forgiving God. He is, absolutely. What else? Anything else? He is merciful. Yep. What's that? He gives hope. Absolutely. He is a refuge. Yep. He listens. He's a listener. He shelters, provides a safe place, right? Right? What's that? He leads. He does. So he's not passive. He leads out into the future, right? Right. Okay. So is this God a weak God? He's not a weak God. Isn't it interesting that our fears, when we're afraid of something or someone, we blow it. If they're the biggest thing, so overwhelming for us, they become this huge, big thing. But the psalmist is appealing to someone who's bigger, more powerful than this. And so as we appeal to him, all of a sudden he cuts these down to size, right? All right, so now we come to the psalmist. And so here is the God who's here, and here are the enemies, the wicked over here. And so what is the attitude and the approach of the psalmist? He wants to go to the temple and pray. Yep. What else? Isn't that interesting? So, sometimes when I'm afraid, I do this bravado thing, right? Just kind of just going to pretend that I can take him on. He doesn't do that. He is humble, and he takes this lower place. That's really interesting. What else? Yep.
David knows that God can fix anything, so he is reaching out to him to help him.
So David knows that God can fix it. God is the fixer. God's the cure giver, right?
He knows that he can change the person who may be hurting her.
Okay, so God can have an influence on the person who's causing the hurt. Yep. Okay. Oh, go ahead. So who is God is? Oh, the psalmist is. The psalmist is. So the psalmist is put some thought into this. So he's not just slapping it together. He's putting some thought into it. Yes, Mary Lou. So that's part of this humility, right? So this sense that the psalmist is submitting himself to God, recognizing the final judge isn't us, the final judge is him, right? Anything else? Yeah. Trust, absolutely. So he's giving God the trust. Yes.
Where it says, make your way straight before him. God puts people on a path. Sometimes we think it's because, then there's implications.
So to make my path straight before him. Boy, that's a powerful thing. So now, we're kind of getting to this thing. So humility, making my path straight. And so there is a piece of the psalmist's prayer that is, get him, God, right? I mean, there's a piece of this prayer. Is it there? There's get him, God, isn't there? That piece. But there is also a piece that coming out of this humility that says, you know best. So for me, I need to be able to submit myself to you, and I need you in this complex, crazy world of ours to make my paths straight. That's a fascinating thing, isn't it? Because there's this sense that we don't always know what the right thing is. And so we appeal to the God who's the God of wisdom and justice, and we say, in the midst of all of this convoluted stuff, Lord God, make my paths straight so that I don't wander from the path. Because, fear is a tremendously powerful, motivating force to get us to kind of weave all over the place. And so his prayer is, make my paths straight so that I can walk with wisdom. Give me wisdom that's beyond my ability in order to be able to handle all of the complexities of this world and to walk through it. There is the challenge then to not only tell God to work in them, but Lord God, work in me. Work in my heart so that what I want are straight paths. So that what I don't want is to walk in this continued confusion and wandering road. And that's tough. It takes a lot of courage to be able to pray that prayer, because not always do we want straight roads that God gives to us. Not always do we want God's way of doing things, because it feels like we ought to be able to come up with a better way on our own. And so this desire, asking God to give us the desire to be able to have straight roads. This past week I've been kind of reflecting on Billy Graham and his passing, 99 years old. And so this guy started his ministry back in the 40s. So had a ministry of like 60 years. And it was a religious ministry that spanned all of that time. And one of the amazing things about it is just the longevity. That it was so productive, has been so productive over such a long period of time, when there have been ministers and evangelists and organizations that have fallen here, left and right, and all over the place with scandals and all kinds of things. And Billy Graham's organization never did that. And so you have to ask yourself the question, what is the secret sauce of the Billy Graham organization and his leadership style? And it goes back, if you read his biography, it goes back into the very early days of his ministry. There was a time in the 40s when he was undergoing a lot of criticism. And a lot of people were pointing at a lot of things that hadn't been tightened up the way that they should have. And so his leadership team, there were about 4 of them, he brought together at a hotel in California, and he said, it was in Modesto, California. And he said, I want each of us to go to our hotel rooms for an hour. by ourselves and to pray and to ask God, what are the greatest challenges that are threats to us as we look out into the future for our ministry? And so they went out and they prayed, and after an hour they came back, and the overlap of the things that were the threats for them were pretty considerable. And so they came up with what they felt like were these bedrock principles that they felt like God gave to them that would provide integrity for them over the long haul. The first one had to do with the use of money. That there was going to be financial transparency to their donors. Now, this is in the 40s. Before, all of this, financial transparency, nobody was talking about that in business or in ministry. Nobody was talking about that, but he was. Financial transparency. The second piece had to do with sexual integrity. Count the numbers of times that evangelists and religious leaders have fallen because of, and political leaders, crying out loud all over the place, are... So they made it one of their bedrock principles that they would not travel alone, meet alone, eat alone with a member of the opposite sex. That there would always be somebody else there with them. The third piece had to do with their relationship with other churches, because they didn't come out of a single church. They made the decision that they were not going to criticize other leaders or other church denominations, regardless of how those denominations or churches might have criticized them. And so there was a sense of, in an area of church splits and all kinds of turmoil, they were going to stand, and they were not going to kind of play party politics among the church. And then the last one had to do with publicity, that they would be transparent in terms of talking about the things that were going on within the organization. So if there was a problem, they would talk to the press and they'd talk about the problem. If there were crusades that were televised, or the amount of attendance that were there's always the temptation on the part of religious leaders or political leaders or business leaders to exaggerate, right? Bump up the numbers because it looks better. They decided right there and then that they were not going to do that. The truth was going to be the truth, and it was going to speak for itself. Those four principles became what they called the Modesto Manifesto, and others have called it the secret sauce of this organization of integrity, so that people could know that they could trust them. Straight paths, right? Straight paths. Wisdom that comes from being in a relationship with God, with a God who holds us accountable, as well as our enemies, and gives to us the opportunity to look at our hearts and to be able to ask the question, what really is in our hearts? So that as we look out into the future, we can press into the great things that God has, because our paths are straight. This whole thing about prayer. Sometimes when I look at my own life and my own prayer life, it's like pretty thin soup. It feels like a lot of times, I'm just kind of telling God, ticking off, the kinds of things that I want him to do for me. This is powerful stuff. It is the opportunity for us to lay our hearts before the God who cares for us and loves us, and to be honest with him in a way that oftentimes we're not even honest with ourselves, and to be able to open ourselves to him so that we can genuinely face the challenges that are out there, not be distracted or intimidated by them, and achieve the goals that will genuinely make a change in our lives and in the lives of the people that we care about. May God help us to be a community of that kind of vibrant prayer. Amen.